Alright, time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com also. Kind of interesting that I was able to get that domain name. That nobody else thought that maybe physics should be debated by people. Kind of surprising, really. But anyway, um, obviously it doesn't do any good because no one still thinks that anything about physics should be debated. It's just listen to the heroes and they'll tell us what to believe. And obviously they'll show us no physical evidence. So it's all just a mathematical formulation that maybe gets answers, maybe doesn't. I don't know. We haven't seen any of these proofs. I mean, even Einstein's theory, I've never seen a video where somebody takes the position of Mercury, does the big giant equation, and shows us where it's going to be tomorrow or whatever, 10 years from now. Um, this doesn't really happen on the internet. Not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying it's just part of the fact that they just always sidestep the hard part of explaining exactly what this mathematics is contriving and how it's contriving it. And really all it comes down to is the formula is pretty much just creating a synthetic Vulcan. It's just creating a little bit of an irregularity in the sun's motion to create a little bit of irregularity in Mercury. But anyway, it's a side subject. The fact that the evidence stinks is so glaring, and these people really are so arrogant. I mean, they just say this stuff like all reasonable people have to believe. And, Sean Carroll pretends, to be humble enough to say, well, we could be wrong. But it's like Richard Feynman saying it. Oh, we could be wrong, but no, us, the smartest people in the world, us, if we didn't think of it, nobody's going to think of it. That's their real attitude. And frankly, thinking about it isn't that difficult when you just go back to, Newton. You go back to what was understood to be a mechanical system and just sit there and allow that to decide how you draw the next step. And instead they went for all this wooey crap like mv squared, which no evidence for it. They still can't show you any car crashes or anything demonstrating the collection of this extra energy things are supposed to have. And it's hundreds of years old, this dogma. And their new dogma is even worse because it's all so complicated that nobody can actually tell whether the experiment does what they claim it does. So they claim they see entangled photons. All right, the idea is they have to measure two photons that left the same place at the same time, and they have to measure the same two photons somewhere else after they hit mirrors and such, when there's no theoretical reason to think a mirror reflects photons at the same time ever, because mirrors don't have a real surface. Mirrors are made of atoms, and the photon could reflect off atoms 10 atoms deep. It could reflect off the surface atom. Just depends on the circumstance, which part of the atom you hit, which atom you hit. And so you can't really measure two photons, the same two photons, somewhere else after they hit mirrors. That should be logic. I mean, that should be something everybody agrees that, okay, you're going to have to really demonstrate that it's the same two photons. And they didn't have to demonstrate anything. They just had to say, we did it. That's all physics requires, is the right person says, we did it, I did it. And that's all the world needs to know. It's just really bad. Anyway, get to the video. So he's doing an interview with some guy called Michael Schumer, who calls his channel Skeptic, and he doesn't seem very skeptical. And it's another one of these channels, kind of like the Kurt Jamal guy, or whoever. It's giving latitude to a bunch of the wackiest kind of nonsense theories, as long as they're really wacky. So if you have some theory that there's little green men in our brains running us, UFOs, uh, they'll talk to them. Okay, they'll talk to flat earthers. So it's like, well, science loses, in my opinion, some credibility when the icons of physics will do shows where the content isn't really scientific. So this guy does a bunch of shows with a bunch of pseudoscience morons, you could argue, and and people like Dennett and Sean Carroll and Spogowski, because they're selling a book, will do their shows, even though their shows really aren't clean enough. They really shouldn't be doing clickbait bullshit shows. So anyway, that's the context, and so so they waste some time here talking about us, the outsiders, the dissidents, and so it's just another example of how they screen and how they should say it should be screened in a sense, when there's a lot of valid arguments about every single thing they claim. The existence of quarks should be debated. All of these things should be debated because the evidence isn't that clear. It isn't that strong. It isn't the most proven theory in the history of mankind. I mean, they do an experiment, with this device, this magnetron, and they know exactly what the magnetron is doing, and they have a formula duplicating what they have assumed this thing is doing, and then claim how brilliant it is that their formula matches with the results when they already know what the results are going to be. It's almost like watching somebody do pole vaulting 700 times, having all of the information about what the average is, and then predicting the average. That's not miraculous. Anyway, so let's just play some of this crap and blah, blah, blah.
That's kind of like a lurking big thing. If you didn't know that matter was made of atoms, you could just posit that there's something called wood. And wood is stable, and there's metal, and that's also stable, and they have properties of tensile strength and heat capacity or what have you. But once you know that everything is made of atoms, and you realize that atoms are themselves made of a nucleus and some electrons, then new questions arise.
So they always talk about what an atom's made out of, and yet they think the atom has muons in it, and has neutrinos in it, and has positrons in it, and I don't know what the hell I don't know what the negative proton is called. But it has all of this anti-crap in it, plus all of these strange bosons and whatnots inside of it, and yet they'll never, they'll never diagram anything close to whatever this crap is. They actually think these gluons are actually creating tubes through space. So it's actually is like a rubber band. It sticks to something at one end, and then it jumps to the other thing and sticks to it, and then pulls the two things together. That's their understanding of the strong force. Too silly or what?
You didn't have before. And even though you didn't think this was a problem, suddenly it's a gigantic problem. And in the case of the transition from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, the leaps that had to be made were not at all incremental. They were really throwing everything out and replacing it.
Exactly. So that should be understood. It's throwing everything out and creating a huge woo-averse. So just throw out the idea that you gain some knowledge about these elements. You have wave particle, but even if we concede some wave particleness, the idea is the force is this little stuff doing this speed of light thing, and the matter moves much slower than the speed of light, okay, and is jostled by the force. And that simple principle, okay, was enough of a foundation, and you really didn't need to go into all this ghost crap.
With something different, which of course that something different has to replicate the successes of the previous theory, so there has to be a limiting case.
And the successes of what? And again, so the Bohr model of the atom, he did say something about that, how because the electron is spinning, somehow it's doing work. So unlike the moon going around the earth, somehow when an electron's spinning, orbiting, it's somehow doing work and creating a magnetic field and doing all this. Why? You don't have to believe that. And I would argue there's no reason to. But clearly, the simplest answer is not to pretend it's not a real particle, that the moon isn't really the moon. The simple answer is to say, why does it have to orbit? If I make it a magnetic monopole, I can stick it out there by just creating a relationship to the nucleus where it's net positive, but it still has negative components inside of it, repulsive components. So yes, it's net positive, but it isn't overwhelmingly completely positive. Neutrons are electrons and protons. The nucleus has twice as many protons in it as electrons, but it has electrons.
Indeed, we talk about the classical limit of quantum mechanics all the time, but the underlying conceptual framework is very different.
You must get these theories of everything, as I call them, people that just write you that say, I've been thinking about this, and I have this theory I've been working out, and I'll share the Nobel Prize with you if you'll help me with the math.
So they make this joke, but the fact is that mechanically there's a lot wrong with their theory, and it's just a fact. If you look at the foundations of their physics, it's all nonsense. Okay, so mv squared, nonsense, never proven, never demonstrated, never collected. And there are clear evidence now where, the Mythbusters crash cars at 50 miles an hour and 100 miles an hour. No evidence of it. A lever disproves it in the sense that a lever can't find this kinetic energy theory. And then you got things like wave particle with the photons and their own experiment. If they did any fair analysis at all, they'd have to concede a single slit in water does not create a pattern. Single slit in light does. And then a single impediment with light creates a pattern. And what's the sensible wave idea there? There's no bubbling surfaces to make bubbles. You can't make your little bulgy waves, okay, with a single impediment. And what would the point be anyway? Because the point is your mathematics says the wave center has to be right on the surface. This is the distance that predicts, the distance between the surfaces predicts the correct mathematical geometry. So if I made a wave, okay, that was one wave here, one wave on this side of the surface, one wave on this side of the surface, the wave centers would have to be over the surface of the object, which that's not how the waves are going to be formed. So the wave centers for their drawing doesn't match their math. So it's got easily detectable flaws that indicate clearly that this isn't a phenomenon of some photon saying, oh, what slit should I go through? It's a phenomenon all created. All the fringe pattern is being created by scatter, essentially, at the surfaces. The surfaces are scattering bits of a photon, and the pieces are aligning on the surface with a 50-50 chance of being in phase or out of phase. That simple explanation works fine. No entanglement, no Copenhagen, no many worlds, no entanglement, just no nonsense. And they won't even listen to it. They won't even hear it defended. Again, even Lesage gravity, they won't even give it a fair shot. It only has one single defect, okay, that is drag. And they won't even speculate on the possibility that, well, maybe there is a catch there. Electrons and protons are dragged to a halt. And it's only helium nucleuses that can fly through space. You have to have something bigger than a helium nucleus or you can't throw it into space and have it go forever. So maybe there is something to the fact that there is actually this drag problem, and somehow it's overcome when you put enough electrons and protons together. But they won't even hear the argument.
I've literally gotten that mentioned to me. I will share the Nobel Prize with you. Yes.
So what? It's still. So I offered him more than $2,000. Not sure it was 3 or 4, but I offered him more than $2,000 just to engage this argument. And so, what's the big problem? You're getting paid to debunk somebody. That seems to me a pretty no-lose proposition. You can show all the other people who think they're so damn smart, you can show them all up, okay, by destroying, okay, this person with a theory who thinks they're right and you're full of crap. So why are you afraid? And why are all of you afraid? None of you will take the money. All right, I'm going to turn the speed down because, yes, it's a little too much, probably. Better pause to do it. All right, should be back.
That's
So
right.
why not? Why would you pay attention to somebody? I mean, what's the criteria for paying attention to somebody who's on the margins in science and somebody
Yeah,
who's
I mean,
not?
that's another super good question because it is, science is not an aristocracy. Anybody in principle.
So, right, but it is. So there's no, see, this is the bullshit. It's not an aristocracy. But of course it is, okay? You can't get the door. You can't pry the doors open. There's just no way. So it is a very closed system where only people within this hierarchy will decide. The 100 people who get to decide what the truth is. And that's it.
Could very well come up with a really good theory.
But you won't listen to it. You won't allow there to be an argument about it. You'll just mock it and degrade it and say it's wrong because they're ignorant. And that's the end of the debunk. Okay? So, but you will point out to flat earthers how they're wrong. And that's the hypocrisy. So when they know they can win the argument, they'll make the argument. But when they can't win the argument, or they certainly can't win the argument that, well, they can't show me their evidence, okay, because it is just obtuse, that's when they run away.
There's basically two
I mean, Bohr decided what atoms look like. Nobody else did. I mean, they just said, okay, his vision of this spinning crap, somehow it gets into an orbit. Orbits are complicated right from the start. You got to know that's got to be a problem. How could you ever get the speed regulated? Because it has to be a very precise speed at a very precise distance. Garbage.
criteria that I most lean on. One is how willing is this person to learn what we already know, right?
So they already know it. So if you haven't wasted your time learning, some sort of entanglement formula, or the other nonsense, okay, that doesn't do anything. It's just math tricks that have there's no intuition in it. There's no logic in it. It's per second, whatever the fuck that means. Nobody ever goes 60 miles per hour, but somehow, okay, energy is per second.
If you think that you're a super genius who's come up with
So you don't have to be a super genius. That's not the argument. The argument is whether or not there's, you can evaluate the evidence and realize the evidence sucks. You can read the history. I'm just saying, look, I have to be a genius to read the history, to look up Leibniz, find out he just said so. He had no experiment. So he just says 4 pounds dropped 1 foot, same as 1 pound dropped 4 feet. Everybody just says, okay, he says so. And then you did these de Châtelet experiments that all have giant flaws in them. I mean, they're theoretically flawed. They can't, in theory, get the right answer. And, and that's all you have. In 300 years, what else do you have as experimental evidence? So I have to be a genius to figure out that maybe you people way jumped the evidence, that you decided something was true long before you had enough evidence to think it was true, and then you just accepted it as a dogma, and you never backstep to go find out. You've never done any analysis of the two-slit experiment. You've never even put photographic plates on the two sides to see at what angles the pattern stops. The pattern theoretically should be at all angles. So why don't you, let the experiment run for a few days and see if you get any photons going 90 degrees? You haven't even bothered. You never even did Einstein's experiment, the Eddington experiment, totally flawed. It's another one. Just look it up. Totally flawed experiment. The guy says right in his journal, I got 10% of the data quality, and I wouldn't stake my life on these results. Yet Einstein got a New York Times headline saying Einstein proven right. Okay? I mean, is that good science? No, it's garbage science, and they don't have a counter argument. They can't make any counter argument explaining why they haven't done this simple experiment from space where there's 400 times better resolution and they could probably use Jupiter.
theory of everything that has eluded the greatest minds of physics.
Right. The greatest minds in physics implying that they're great minds. Okay, so they're not smart enough to figure out that mv squared doesn't make any sense at all. That saying it takes 25 times the fuel to go 5 times as fast is ludicrous nonsense. Saying an 8-pound bowling ball going twice the speed has twice the energy of a 16-pound ball going half the speed, it's on its face nonsense, because no bowler can make this work. They can't derive any more extra energy. I mean, believing it when, a bullet goes into a ballistic pendulum with 2,000 joules of energy and you collect 1.7. 0.001%, 1% of the energy. What is that? With all our technology, we can't collect more than 1/100th of the energy? Come on. You don't have to be a genius. You just have to be honest. And that's what you people lack, is integrity and honesty. You're all just selling woo books. You're selling fables to fools. That's all this is. You've replaced a junky religion with a shitty religion.
But you can't be bothered to learn quantum mechanics and general relativity. Then I'm going to be a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be a little bit skeptical if you haven't done any history and you haven't really looked up where they have proof that mv squared has any physical correlate to an actual physical experiment, which it doesn't. Okay. And the only experiments that might indicate some indication of it are experiments, again, that you could find flaws in. Why would you make a non-friction cart with little metal wheels? I mean, you're supposed to be measuring linear momentum, and then you put a bunch of metal wheels on the object that you're going to do this linear test with. You, as a physicist, can't figure out that probably isn't the way you want to go. The bigger the wheel, the less rotation, the less angular momentum you're going to collect. Can you figure that out? The greatest minds in physics can't figure out that that's probably not how you design the experiment?
Then my prior is going to be low. Like, if you can't handle the math, but you think you leapt...
So again, why would I have to handle the math? Physics isn't about math, it's about geometry. It's about recognizing that there's things, they move with vectors, okay? So there's the math of the vectors maybe, but it's really not that complicated. I mean, it really isn't. I mean, the real physics isn't complicated. Your fake physics is complicated. But why would I indulge in believing in some Forky symbol representing some unmeasurable quantity?
Right to the right answer, then, maybe, but I'm not going to place bets on that possibility. And the other...
Well, that's because that's what you ought to have to do, though. That's part of having integrity, is if you're going to spout this crap as the truth, you ought to have the integrity to be accountable for the fact that if somebody does undo you, you all ought to lose a shirt or two. You ought to lose a little bit of skin, okay? Because what you have done has been arrogant, obnoxious assholes to anyone who disagrees with you. And so if any one of us does someday prove you assholes to be the real imbeciles, the fools and the dupes, what's going to be your penance, okay, for your crimes against the future? Because what you really did was hurt the future by propping up crap with hyperbole. Okay, that's all you've done. You've inflated bullshit balloons. And you've never required the evidence to confirm what you're saying. You've just lied, essentially, about how it's the most proven theory in the history of mankind when it's not even close.
One is, and this I think extends broadly throughout all of human interaction. When they talk to you, are they trying to learn? Or are they just trying to...
So again, so does he think he's trying to learn? So is that his argument? I go on these shows trying to learn. I propagandize for theories and argue for theories because I'm trying to learn. Yeah, I don't think so. Too ridiculous. You're going to go to church and try to learn? What the hell is that nonsense? Okay, these are competing ideas, and the fact is they need a fair trial. Okay, nobody at the trial is supposed to be trying to learn. No, they're trying to prove. And that's what you can't do, is prove what you're spouting to be the truth. Irritating. Let's just remember, we landed on the moon, okay? And I think Sean Carroll, if you ask him the question, what landed us on the moon? mv squared, 1/2 mv squared, or momentum, mv. I think he knows the right answer.
Tell you their theories. Like when you point out a reason to be skeptical, do they think about it and go, oh yes, okay, that's something, or do they just invent a whole new part of their theory that they hadn't mentioned before that helps them wriggle out of that? I mean,
talk about wriggling out. I mean, it's just so hilarious. Dark matter, dark energy. The measurement problem. We have a measurement problem. Okay, well, just make new universes. That'll solve it. Yeah. So there's a new universe created, so I don't have to worry about what happened in those other universes. I don't have to be accountable to what actually is measured here, because I can just pretend I'm on universe 74, and that's where everything was just fine. I mean, what a pile of crap. I mean, to sit there and say they have to constantly re-engineer their theory when you argue with them, when that's all physics does is keep re-engineering with goop and gobble. I mean, come on, gluon. Let's just invent some wacky particle, right, that does this impossible thing. Just impossibly silly.
there's a difference between working in good faith to try to understand the
Right, so that's the right, and there's no good faith among you cowards. So there's really no integrity here. And so what would the bounty have to be? Let's say all the dissidents didn't hate each other because they all have different theories, so they really don't get along at all. And let's say they did get along and they put a big pile of cash up. How much cash would they have to put up to be able to interrogate your physics? You know, to point out, why exactly do you think you are measuring the same exact photon 15 meters away? You shoot photons, you make them go through a bunch of hoops and jumps, and then you measure exactly the same two photons 15 meters away? And now they even say they did it at 300 miles. Oh, bullshit, you did.
universe, which is very, very hard, versus just kind of being on an ego trip and thinking that you have all the right answers.
Oh, yeah, so talk about ego trips. It's just amazing. The extraordinary ego of these people, the Feynmans and the Sean Carrolls and the Brian Greens and the whatever the other weasel is. And the other weasel. Oh, Degrassi Tyson. No ego problems there. Amazing bullshit.
Well, you always hear the story, well, Einstein was just working as a patent clerk. Well, but he had already had professional training in the academy and published in mainstream peer.
Regardless, okay, those publications, right, people will tell you those are all crap. So what he published was on the subject of thermodynamics, and from what I've heard, the 3 papers he published before 1905, those 3 papers were all rubbish. So that really is an argument to be made, okay, that he wasn't terribly successful in terms of gaining any instant credibility. And certainly it would be, in my opinion, very good learning experience to be working as a patent clerk. I mean, you're gaining incredible insights based on what people are trying to invent and claiming they can do certain things, and it's going to give you nothing but inspiration. So, and I certainly say Einstein was a good engineer. And so there's lots of people who are good engineers. You don't need to be a mathematician, okay, or you don't need to do quantum mechanics. Now, I'd argue that it'd be a good idea to watch the first 10 lectures physics might give you about Newton and Galileo and get the basic idea of the dynamics that are involved, how heat moves. But once you get past things like convection and conduction, electricity, all reality disappears. Now it's all abstract mush.
You journal.
Yeah, I always like to point out, like, Einstein knew the physics of his day better than anybody. Like, he was not, uneducated in what people thought of as mainstream physics at the time. And yeah, he had a PhD. He was earning a living as a patent clerk for a very brief period of time before people realized, Holy
Yeah, so and there was just a huge inconsistency in Einstein. His wooey, spooky action theory of bent space, whatever the fuck that could mean. He did kind of concede it was a bent ether of some kind because he basically said you can't bend nothing. Um, was in my opinion junk science is no less junky spooky crap, okay, than because there's no energy involved, right? I mean, you're creating momentum, right? No other physicist can think of this simple argument. Gravity, which they say is not a force, it's just a bent geodesic, is creating momentum into an object. The thing hits, creates heat in the object, and the heat radiates as energy, as real photons. See, in space, they play games like the black hole radiates Hawking radiation, so it's not real. And then the gravitational wave mechanism somehow converts, okay, hunks of matter into gravitational bent space. You know, they have all these mechanisms that have there's absolutely no connection to any idea of conservation of matter and energy. It just doesn't exist in their theory. But obviously it's not it's not conversational if you're hitting it with momentum derived from bent space, so no force was involved, and then you create a force. That's bad theory, frankly. And the fact that you can't even see those flaws.
smokes, this is Einstein. We all want him on our faculty.
Well, there's a selection bias there too, because you also hear about,
So we know, yes, you all want him on your faculty because you got a New York Times headline saying Einstein proven right. And the proof, first of all, doesn't mean much. But second of all, it was never verified. So by the time Einstein was dead, there still wasn't any kind of confirmation of this nonsense, that light is somehow bent twice as much as matter. So a force, none of the forces are affected by a force. Okay, none of the other forces are bent by bent space. You can't bend a magnet, magnetism with bent space. And so all of a sudden, we're supposed to believe that this photon is some magical thing that somehow is bent by, so it's a force bent by a force. And on top of that, it's bent twice as much for some miracle reason. So the fastest, most discrete thing in the universe is somehow bent twice as much by a force that usually only affects matter, okay, and affects matter based on how dense it is. So the least dense thing is somehow affected the most. Oh, bullshit it is.
oh, they laughed at Galileo.
The other point was, though, and then Einstein turns around, and so they're not going to concede, is that he turns around and says, yeah, quantum mechanics is just wooey nonsense. Why the hell would I think the moon needs me to be here to look at it? I don't need to measure it, okay? It doesn't need to be measured to exist.
And so on. And then somebody said they laughed at the Wright brothers. Well, they laughed at the Wright brothers. They laughed at the Marx brothers. So what?
That's right.
But what's being left out is all the people that had radical new ideas, and they turned out to be just quackery.
Well,
yes, and so, but what's the odds that, I'm just saying that let's look at this. What if they are all wrong, right? Will that prove once and for all that there's no point in playing this game of saying you can detect it, okay? You can detect the right answer. And how would you do it anyway? Well, you do it by putting it on trial. And the whole point is they never put any of these facts on trial. The double slit, the wave particle, the orbiting model of the atom, none of it was put on trial. There was no evidence collected. There was no opposing theories provided. They just told us all we have to believe because physicists say so. So it's just going to prove their fallibility. It's going to show that, you really can't trust authorities, okay, because they will pretend they have credible, substantial, seal of approval, and it's all a lie. And this will be demonstrated is that all this crap about how it's the most proven theory is circular mush. They didn't prove anything. They just they just re-engineered the rest of their formulas to fit their formula.
Well, here's another, possible clue as to this very good question you asked about how do you know. most working scientists aren't trying to find the theory of everything.
So that's pretty funny to me, right? Just, that they wouldn't be damn curious about, well, look, it's evolution. I should be looking for the primitive fossil. I should be looking for the mechanism in physics that's more primitive, more simple, the basic thing, the building blocks. I mean, not to look for the building blocks when you're trying to explain how the wall is made doesn't make any sense to me at all. I think it'd be obviously the first thing you would do is try to find something to describe how it works. It's like seeing the lever in a mechanical machine. It would be the first kind of thing you're doing is looking for what's the elemental function. The spinning wheel is a stick pushing. You look for that.
Even most working physicists aren't trying to find the theory of everything. They're doing honest, difficult work.
So honest, that's debatable, right? Because they're going where the money is. So I don't know how honest that is.
Trying to push what we know forward a little bit. And that's already super duper hard.
Super duper. And so, so I'm not going to diss all physicists, and I'm not going to diss wasting time, thinking you're getting somewhere or doing something. But the point is that none of them have survived some "are you being a dupe" test. So they haven't taken the "are you being a dupe" test, because frankly, there's a lot that they think is right that wasn't right, and they were just persuaded by a bunch of exaggerations provided by Sean Carroll or Richard Feynman. I mean, Richard Feynman's description of the double slit experiment is preposterously inaccurate. And it fools people because he left out so much. He left all the parts out that would make somebody say, gee, that doesn't really fit, does it? Oh, that doesn't really fit either, does it? Oh, a single slit in water doesn't create a pattern. Oh, so a single wave can't do anything, can it? No. So how do you make two waves in the single slit with light? And they manufacture a mathematical catch. They draw it with, they have to draw it with two waves, right? And they can't put the waves on the surfaces because that would be too huge a giveaway. So what they do is they don't draw it. Okay, that's it. So they'll draw the double slit, but they're never going to draw you the single slit. Because if they have to draw it, they have to put the waves right there on the surfaces.
I'd be much more interested in reading a paper that arrived on my desk that said, I have a new calculation of the magnetic moment of the muon.
Yeah, so again, the non-existent muon, whatever the fuck a muon is, where is it? Where do they hang out? Are they in nucleuses? Where do muons hang out? Whatever the fuck that is, right? So my argument is all these things are just electrons or protons moving at different speeds, and there's really nothing else to the story.
Than one that says I have a new theory of everything, but they never do, right?
The God particle. I found the God particle.
Right answer.
Yeah. So they found the God particle, right? And they can't show us a picture of the God particle because some abstract notion of some whatever blips on their detector thingy. Okay, after they smashed a certain amount of energy into a piece of whatever, tungsten. And there's really no real evidence that it's anything called a Higgs or it's any kind of particle or it's any of that at all. It's just debris, okay, that just shot out of an atom. And the debris is either going to be in the form of force, clumps of it, or it's going to be an electron or a proton moving pretty fast. But that's all you're going to get.
Yeah, one of...
So they don't have any pictures of this. It has to be understood. They don't have it. There's no picture of a quark. There's no trace on in a cloud chamber. It doesn't exist. And even if it did exist, you'd have to analyze it and say, wow, what's going on there? I mean, even a cloud chamber is such a distant view of something, right? Because the whole idea is you're condensating atoms, okay, to see a trail, a vapor trail. And so you've got to ask yourself the question, how can I know what's creating the vapor trail? it's affected a whole bunch of atoms. It's not like one, that trail through the cloud chamber is made of maybe 1,000,000 atoms. You've affected 1,000,000 atoms with whatever went shooting through. And so how do you know what it is? All right. It's just, bullshit.
Feynman's colleagues tells a story of.
I've never even seen a good piece of slow motion of a cloud chamber. Even that would be interesting to see how fast it actually gets through, because it is plowing through all these atoms. It's affecting all these atoms. To affect the atoms, you basically have to be bumping into their fields, their forces, pretty heavily, or you have to be hitting them overtly. You have to be hitting electrons and protons. But we don't get any of that.
Visiting him in the final days or weeks of the.
It's like the positron. You'll never see a picture of it. The 1956 picture, that's the only picture ever taken. It's a Sasquatchian bullshit kind of picture. Might as well be one of those old cigar photos of a UFO. And they say, there, isn't that proof enough? I have a picture from 1956. Doesn't that prove it?
His life before he died of cancer, and he goes over to his house. He's knee deep in calculations, and he's just working on some tiny little particular problem he wanted to solve. Not like, hey, I'm about to die, I think I'll write something about the grand universe of everything.
Yeah, it kind of just shows that Feynman was an asshole. Whatever. I mean, very bad. I mean, it's very, the whole fact that we have to be brutally killed, it just takes all the, it makes it, to me, it's another one of these huge logic errors. Let's all be happy and optimistic because we're going to get killed horribly. What? It's like you knowing that the tsunami's coming and you just sit there and say, oh, well, party hardy.
Yeah. I mean, that progress happens in fits and starts, but you don't know when the fits are.
So that's what they call it. Okay, but obviously that's, the whole idea of a progress in a theory doesn't mean it gets wooier and wooier, sillier and sillier. The idea is to get more real, all right, and to get more substantial in your evidence, not less substantial. And now the physics is so abstract that it has no connection at all, like string theory. It just has no connection at all to anything materially rational.
When the starts are, you don't know when the breakthrough is going to be. It might be from out of the blue. So you have to work on those things where you can make tangible progress, and hopefully it builds up into something very big.
On the other hand, Steve Gould wrote an essay in which he talked about meeting Feynman at Caltech. So Steve was coming to Caltech to give a public talk or something, and Feynman contacted him at his office at Harvard and said, oh, I'd love to have lunch with you. Just have some ideas I want to bounce off you. So turns out So
this guy has all these little anecdotal stories I guess he's gotten from other people, but, whatever. So yeah, Feynman was clueless. All these people are clueless in the sense that, yes, they have, they expect somebody else to care about all their abstract nonsense and waste all of their neurons on abstract nonsense, when maybe they should be using their neurons to figure out, how do I make 1/2 mv squared actually make sense with the world I exist in? Because in the world I exist in, it doesn't take 25 times the fuel to spin something 5 times as fast. So they've wasted their time on all this abstract crap. And so this is just an example story of where, Feynman's wasted all his time in physics and really hasn't studied anything else.
Feynman had worked out on his own sexual selection. And Gould's like, we figured this out like a century ago. and Feynman said,
this, yes.
I never read anything, when I want to solve a problem, I just want to come to it fresh. It's like, well, yeah, but you should know what's already been done.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's easier now than it was then. Now we have no excuse because we have the internet and we have a whole bunch of popular books about these things. Read a book,
No, watch a lecture. Okay, the lectures are all online. All right, and so yeah, you can see, and then research some of the experiments they do, and you'll realize, oh, it's the same exact experiment they did in 1956, and they filmed it, and they're still teaching exactly using the same devices because it comes out their way, and that's always what it's really about, is demonstrating something, not testing something, and that's what you got to look out for when they're trying to force it to match.
Learn something about this stuff. It's not that hard.
That's why the carts have the little metal wheels. The company making the carts knows they're going to be used for this specific experiment, to this specific arguments to be made. And so the carts have been designed to create the effect by hiding the linear momentum of the car, by storing more energy in the rotation of the wheels depending on the motion. So the fast cart loses more of its momentum than the slow cart to the rotation of the wheels.
Take an online course.
Yeah. Okay, so anomalies like the wobble in Mercury.
Yeah, I mean, just so obnoxious, that everybody else needs to be educated to what you think. And if they don't believe what you believe, that somehow that's their fault. And it's because they're ignorant. And it's not because they're ignorant. It's because they went to the subject. Like I said, I mean, it's unfortunate that I guess it has to happen that way, where, he went to school and he believed everything, the dorky professor had to say. And unlike this guy who calls himself a skeptic, I didn't trust them. Okay, I wasn't going to just believe what they said. And so when they draw some wacky diagram on the board saying this is what a photon is, and it makes absolutely no sense at all, there's way too much motion in it, it's way too complicated to be so elemental, the sun can't make something doing all that squiggly shit. And how's it know to do the squiggly shit? It's just bullshit. And so you start knowing that this isn't right, so you have to find a better answer. I knew instantly, okay, as soon as they said the photon goes through both slits. No, it didn't. It's a silly answer. There's a goddamn impediment in the middle. Fuck you, it didn't do that. Okay, photons can't do that. They don't play that.
Mercury's orbit that Einstein figures out. That's a different, category of paradigm shift or whatever than what you're talking about with quantum physics.
Well, there's two things going on there too. One is
so the first thing is that yes, we never really did that experiment correctly, and Einstein was never proven right. And yes, the formula was contrived. Einstein was given the task, okay, of explaining Mercury. Okay, it wasn't something he thought of. It was something Eddington said. Well, if you want this theory to get off the ground, maybe you could do something that nobody else can do. So go ahead, explain why Mercury's fucked up. And so we spent 6 months contriving math to explain it. But that's, and look, the irony is in that process, he got it wrong. So his first guess, his first contrivance had the bending of the light being the same as matter. So light bent the same amount as matter. So if they had done the 1917 eclipse, if the war didn't get in the way, Einstein would have been proven wrong. Of course, if light was bent twice as much, which it isn't. It isn't bent at all.
Is that when you have that kind of anomaly,
you can only bend light through scatter. So there's lots of light bending going on. Don't get me wrong. The atmosphere is proof of it, okay? If it wasn't for the atmosphere, again, the daylight would be a completely different kind of thing, right? You could have the blackest shadow by just putting something over you, because then you'd only see light reflected off surfaces. You couldn't, the atmosphere wouldn't be producing light from all kinds of different angles.
You don't know whether it's important or not, right? This was the anomalous motion of Mercury, the precession of its perihelion, became a known problem after we'd already discovered the planet Neptune on the basis of looking at the motion of the outer planets and realizing they didn't quite fit the prediction of Newtonian mechanics. So people said, well, if there's another planet out there, maybe that's perturbing their motions, and that was exactly right.
All right, so let me just say, look, there's a certain just facts about this circumstance that make the two things completely different. And the circumstances is that Mercury is disproportionately close to the sun. So it's like Mercury, Venus, and then the Earth is like 3 inches away. So it's very disproportional. Mercury's unusually close to the sun compared to the other planets. So the fact is that there really could be just some simple thing that's happening locally with the sun that doesn't have distant effects, okay, that only has because of the inverse square law, it can't have an effect at a distance because it's too small a difference, like the two headlights being too close to each other. So if the headlights are very close to each other, at a certain distance you can still see two headlights. At a certain other distance you can't see the two headlights anymore. Well, the same thing could happen here really easily, in the sense that you could have a little bit of noise in the sun's motion, and that little bit of noise affects Mercury, but it doesn't affect Venus because it's just too damn far away. I mean, but all this doesn't get any airtime. And people are just supposed to believe that Einstein has this miraculous formula that somehow takes whatever the simple effect is, right? We know it can't be something complicated that's actually causing the effect, right? We know it has to be relatively simple. The sun can't sing and dance. And yet it's this insanely convoluted and complicated formula. So why would the formula be so complicated if it's just describing some quirk in the bent space?
And that was not a paradox.
And it has to still be a quirk in the bent space. It still has to be some kind of defect in the sun's motion. It's the only way you can contrive this outcome. And that's all the math is really doing, is just creating a defect. It's not proving bent space because it really hasn't changed anything.
Time shift. It's just there's another planet, right? It was literally the first discovery of dark matter in the universe. And so, of course, when they realized that Mercury's
So discovery of dark matter when it's real matter. So it really wasn't dark matter. But anyway.
motion was discrepant, they played the same.
There wasn't any claim that it was completely invisible, okay, that it wasn't ever detectable. It was just, the fact is that it's very, very dim and very far away.
Same game. They predicted the motion of a planet. They even had a name for it, Vulcan. They even discovered it several times, but none of those discoveries turned out to be right. And eventually the correct solution to it did turn out to be a big paradigm change from Newtonian spacetime to general relativity.
Right. And again, was it really that proved it? So beyond that claim that Eddington's experiment means anything because it was garbage, it's a garbage experiment to use as a critical piece of proof, because anybody who says I got 1/10 of the data doing a very difficult experiment, automatically, that's like a flat earther or something, automatically you say, well, we really can't trust these results. Just like he said, he wouldn't stake his life on it. Frankly, if you're going to get a New York Times headline saying Einstein proven right, you should be staking your life on it.
But you don't know ahead of time whether it's just going to be a little tweak or a major ontological conceptual shift.
And the concept is useless. It doesn't fix anything. I mean, saying it's bent space fixes nothing. All right? And the whole idea of saying that time is somehow a place is just irrational. So the whole thing makes no... It doesn't solve any problems. It just creates problems. To pretend that photons can be in frames and that their frames can somehow multiply or divide their speed is just nonsense. They're moving one speed through a physical three-dimensional universe, and that's it. They never move from place to place in the universe. But again, they don't believe universe has places in it. It just has frames of human perception. I mean, again, it's so, it's such a cheat from, human bias. It's almost like going back to saying the Earth is the center of the universe. It's such a cheat, all right, to say that perception has something to do with whether something happened or didn't happen, when we know our perception is limited. I mean, it's just silly to say, okay, two events happen. One of them's 5 miles away, one of them's 3 miles away, 2 nuclear bombs even. And I should have some other expectation. They go off at the same time, and because I felt one of them first, and I heard one of them first, I'm going to assume they didn't happen at the same time? No, my assumption's going to be, yeah, one of them's further away. It took longer for me to get the information. What's so complicated?
And speaking of Feynman, there's that famous definition of science that he gives at Cornell University, 1964. You can watch it on YouTube. The key to science is experiment. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. It doesn't matter how beautiful your guess is, what his name is, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that's exactly the lecture where he explains Lesage gravity, essentially, particle gravity, and explains how it works. It does all the things you need gravity to do, but it has this problem, okay, where, yeah, it'll create drag. But that's it. So you fix the problem. You don't throw out the fact that it does everything you want a gravitational theory to do. So it does all of the gravitational stuff just fine. It creates some problems in the sense that if you have this field of energy in the universe, you have to explain why stuff can be thrown into the universe and it isn't slowed down by banging into more of the stuff. But the same argument would exist for ether or for anything. And the fact is bent space isn't a something, and that's the only way it evades the problem, is because it's not made out of anything real.
You are wrong. Is that true at every level of science, do you think? Does it really come down to experiment?
It's a fun motto, but it's clearly not obviously true because some experiments are wrong.
Yeah, so they're laughing. And, I'd say that the non-experiment never conducted that proved 4 pounds dropped 1 foot is the same energy as 1 pound dropped 4 feet. I'd say that experiment was a pile of shit. Okay, and I can go down the list of all these others. Again, the entanglement experiments depend upon their assertion that they are confident they are measuring the same photons. So get me, there's 2 photons leave a location, okay? They're moving the speed of light, and they're the most discrete, tiniest things you can imagine. And they leave a location at the same time, then they bang into mirrors, and you're receiving them some distance away, okay, 15 meters, 10 meters at least. I think the Allen aspect was 10 meters away. And you're going to see the same exact 2 photons. I mean, it's an amazing pile of crap. When you could argue that they're not the same photons because the fact is when they hit the mirror, the photons pushed on electrons and then the electrons pushed back, making a new photon. So they're not even the same photons anymore.
Oh, right. That's
You can't just say, like, if it disagrees with the experiment, your theory is wrong.
And when you're going to talk about them being entangled, right? They're entangled. Entanglement means that if you measure them, that is, some part of the universe bangs into them, then they have to reveal their true self. So they hit a mirror and they're claiming they didn't get entangled right there. They're already unentangled. They're already outed. They already had to take their mask off. They can't still be entangled if they hit the mirror because it's a measurement. Yeah, we didn't do the measurement, but the mirror did the measurement. And that's all that matters. And they won't even fess up on that fact. They won't even fess up on the fact that Schrodinger's cat can't be entangled as long as there's heat in the box. As long as there's some other kind of real force or real matter interacting with the cat, then there's absolutely no way it could still be entangled in any kind of superposition. It's already been outed because something else took the damn picture of it. Yeah, we don't have the picture, but something else took the fucking picture. So the game is over.
Indeed. In Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, he tells the story of the theory he wrote down with Murray Gell-Mann about the weak interactions, and the first data that came in disagreed with their theory, and his advice to Gell-Mann was, just hold on, let's see if
Yeah, we'll just wait until we can contrive the right answer. Well, again, the positron experiment, done by other people, okay, and the other people for 2 years just said, it's a proton. Yeah, it's a funky proton, but it's a proton. All right, and then one guy decides, well, I'm going to call it a positron because I read the paper. And all of a sudden, it's a positron.
new data comes in and they turned out to be right, you know? I think, physicists, bless their hearts, they're not always grateful.
Yeah, they're not honest is what they aren't. Okay, again, Al-Kahari saying that, banging electrons against a piece of shiny nickel is the same as doing a 2-slit experiment. Now, there's no slits, there's no similarity at all, and yet he says same thing, same exact thing. That's not good science. That's bad lying.
Philosophers of physics, and even philosophers aren't always great philosophers of physics, because physics gives you as its final product
So I don't even know why this distinction between something called a philosopher and a physicist or a scientist. There's just statements about the truth. And all you want to do is make correct statements about the truth, what the circumstance actually is. Either something's good or it's a bad thing. Either it makes money, it loses money. It's worthy of the risk, it's not. These are all philosophical questions in a sense, but they're really scientific questions. They're subject to testing. You test the theory, you test the arguments defending it as being a fact. So if I say atoms are just electrons and protons and there's nothing else there, it's sort of your obligation to show me some preponderance of the evidence, some sort of reason to believe there's other things there. Because frankly, they're not necessary, as I've proven with my simulation. I can create the strong force with 2 + 2 + 3 physics. I can create it. I can simulate exactly how it behaves. And I didn't have to invent a silly gluon.
this pristine, beautiful set of theories about how the world works. But the process of getting there is this enormous, ugly mess.
Right, and it's an ugly mess as an outcome. So again, how can, well, whatever. I'm just saying that I don't know what people find it interesting or satisfying to be given this wooey, mushy answer. Things are just woo, 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 through space, and they're woo, woo, woo when they land, and it's all woo, 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 woo. I just don't know why anyone is satisfied with these silly explanations of how this mechanical system works. They're terrible, awful. I mean, the standard model is incomprehensible crap. You cannot draw a picture of this elemental function. It has so many, it has 1,000 different variables, and there's no way for them to draw an atom and show me what the average atom is doing right now. Here's a drawing of what the average atom looks like right now. I can draw that picture. They can't.
There are mistakes, there are experimental mistakes, there are theoretical mistakes, there are questions that should have been asked and weren't asked and whatever. So rather than saying some, pithy motto about how if it disagrees experiment, it's wrong, be more honest and say, look, it's a back and forth. You do an experiment, you wonder why you got that result, you do.
And what I'm advocating is that there be a process of testing. And the testing should be through debates with people, with people with alternative perspectives. And as soon as a person crosses some kind of integrity line, like they present evidence that everybody knows to be bogus and false, until they lose credibility through their own action, then you take away their credibility. They show up with the picture of Sasquatch with the zipper, in his back. You're done. You've lost your right to argue in court because you're a faker and a phony and a fraud. But until that point, you don't have a right to say somebody's wrong until you prove them to be obnoxious. Until you prove that they're not accepting something that really can't be denied. Or if they're just talking silly, like, SpongeBob created the universe or some kind of other nonsense.
Do the experiment again, someone else does the experiment, you tweak your theory, eventually, it's a long process. It's just not that.
So somebody else does the experiment. No examples of that. I haven't seen somebody else drop 4 pounds 1 foot and 1 pound 4 feet. They don't do the experiment. All right. They never redid the Eddington experiment.
Simple at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's why psychologists and especially social psychologists are now telling people, don't design a whole new theory based on one experiment. These sort of cutesy little experiments where, like, if you stand at the top of the escalator versus the bottom, people give more money at the top, or the clean desk, or the power pump.
Obviously, but these same assholes will, cigarette smoking kills you. Well, let's pay no attention to the fact that most cigarette smokers did a lot of other things that weren't healthy. The statistical relationship between cigarette smokers and people who worked in coal mines are were exposed to, radiation or asbestos or farmers, huge correlations between all of these other influences that make it a lot worse than it would be if they didn't have all these other bad habits like drinking and other things. So that is always dangerous. I'm not defending smoking, don't get me wrong. I'm just defending this obnoxious super hype over the fact that, fat kills more people than cigarettes. Just a fact. And so why isn't there a war on fat?
All these things failed to replicate because they only had one experiment.
Well, I just recently on Blue Sky said I have a simple algorithm for being right 95% of the time about new discoveries in physics that seem surprising and counterintuitive. Just don't believe them.
That's right.
So he's mocking his own industry. Okay, so his own industry of fake, phony, fraudy, exaggerated. We can desalinate water. We can do this. We can do that. We can, all kinds of free energy almost coming out of physics now, and he's sitting here mocking it. No, that's the problem with your science. Your science just allows all of that hype and crap because you don't sit there and stop it. You're the only one who can stop it. There's nobody else but your professional physicists who can tell people you're not allowed to, propagandize bullshit as good science. But they don't do anything about it at all. Alright, video is getting a bit long, I have to admit, so we'll go a little bit more.
Will usually go away, right? Especially if they're like only barely statistically significant. And sometimes they won't go away, and that's great. But sometimes you just don't know, and you have to be patient. Don't demand an answer right away.
I forget who said, I think it was a physicist, that like 90% of what's in published journals is wrong, 90% of what's in textbooks is right.
So obviously it's kind of fun. Again, another shot at their own edited journals. Another shot at their closed door that lets a lot of crap in, okay? But as long as it's super woo and as long as it's presented by Sean Carroll, as long as somebody's named guy is on the paper, yeah, okay, we'll publish whatever wacky shit he says. All right, but nobody else can say anything. So it's just not the way it should be tried. I mean, all people who have any interest in science should want the theories tested and tested hard. All right, not soft. Hard testing, okay, real matches, real fights, and so they'd want to create some sort of mechanism to make that possible, and they're creating nothing to make that possible. They're doing everything to prevent that testing from taking place because they just want to talk religion, their religion.